Hello and welcome to Learner's Permit. I'm your host, Ryan Hamilton. My goal with Learner's Permit is to talk to knowledgeable and passionate people and hopefully learn something new from the conversation. Learner's Permit is my way to celebrate the vast ocean of knowledge that humankind has cataloged. And it's kind of my way of celebrating the fact that no matter what, there's always something new to learn. And that's kind of a nice thought. So in today's episode, I meet with Jordan Pinneke, and we talk proactivity, productivity, and planning primarily. It was really nice to have Jordan on, and I hope you all enjoy the episode. Hey Jordan, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Ryan. Lovely to be on it.
Oh, great to have you. So for all the listeners, Jordan and I met at Minnesota State University Moorhead, or MSUM if you don't have a couple of minutes. And Jordan, since I've met you, you have been just a whirlwind of activity. And today, as I said, I would really like to talk about proactivity and productivity and planning. And I think one of the best ways to emphasize how effective of a, I guess, worker you've been is to kind of go through a little bit of your history because you already have a pretty impressive resume at this point. When you were studying at MSUM with me, you were heavily involved in MSUM's campus sustainability organization, right?
I was indeed, yep.
And at the same time, was that when you were an RA as well?
Yep, yep. Sophomore year was my first year as an RA, while being a secretary in the Office of Campus Sustainability, working on the Sustainability Fee Committee, the Comstock Union Committee, working at the Rock, working as a desk assistant, just like everywhere I could be on campus, I pretty much was there.
Oh. And after that, you transferred to the University of Minnesota, which is where you finished out your bachelor degree, right? You have a bachelor's of science in urban studies and also a minor in sustainability.
Yep. It was I was a sustainability and international relations double major at MSUM. And when getting an offer to transfer to the U, sadly they didn't have a sustainability as a major. So as I was interested in cities and how you can make cities more sustainable, I was like, oh, perfect. Urban studies it is. And so with the minor, I was still able to focus on that, but I ended up more focusing on nonprofit management and urban nonprofits when I went along at the U of M, especially being in a large urban city and knowing how social problems can affect the organization of cities. That's when I started getting more into that side of things. So I went from international sustainable development to urban nonprofit. So don't really know how that happened, but you can trace like the different jobs I had along the way, and it kind of led me to that. But and
Yeah,
now I'm in a completely different field. So
yeah, exactly. Well, it's really good that you, I guess, studied urban studies because now you're living in the Big Apple, and now it seems like that information might pay off a little bit. Because right now you're in New York, right?
I am indeed. When I was finishing up my undergraduate, I applied to AmeriCorps because I wanted to do a year of public service. And because the organization that I was really interested in called City Year, it wasn't located in Minneapolis at all. I was like, well, if I can't be in Minneapolis, I don't really care where I'm going to be. So I just clicked place where needed, and they called me up and said, hey, we have an opening in New York City. Mind coming on out here for a year? And I was like, yeah, sure. It's just a year. New York's fine. I'm going to visit Minneapolis, and so I was placed out here, and I'm still here.
The pizza got to you, I'm sure.
Oh, yes, of course.
And so were you a RA or a CA for 3 years in your bachelor degree?
Yeah, so
All right, one of the crazy ones.
Oh yes. So when I was transferring to the University of Minnesota, I happened to have like just gotten accepted like the day before the application for being a so at the at MSUM it was called being an RA, but
Mm.
at the U it was called being a CA or a community advisor. So um the I got in just in time to do the application, and so I was like a transfer CA. So as my freshmen were like experiencing their first year at the U, so was I. So it was like really weird experience, but I loved it. I was always that like RA type of person, so I decided to do that all 3 years that I could, and I'm so fortunate to have done it and have met the people that I did. So, and now my roommate here in New York City, he was a CA with me back at the U, so retaining those connections.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really is just an interesting experience. Peter and I spoke about that a little bit in the last episode, and just how kind of strange of an experience it is to find yourself kind of in this weird, like, you're a police officer, but you're also like a older sibling, and you're also like a part-time therapist, and you're also a judge. It's a really interesting intersection of people who decide to be RAs and CAs, and it's yeah, we were a fun collection.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, and the funniest thing was that at MSUM I had all female residents, just because that's the way it usually is. You know, you end up having residents that are your same like gender identity. But when I transferred to the U, I think that there was a mix up in my stated gender on the application or something, because I was placed with nearly all men, and and it was like a really weird experience at first, because I was like, I don't know how to like be an RA to like, all men. But then it ended up me being like, I don't know if you ever had heard my nickname like J-Pin
Mm.
back at MSUM, but they all knew me by J-Pin. So then they'd come back like really drunk at night and just be like, J-Pin, like, I don't feel so good. Can you take care of me? And then like pass out on my couch, and like, it's like it was much like physical problems I had to deal with, like much less than like the emotional. Like my roommate like French this guy at this party that I like kind of had a crush on like 5 years ago, and like now I hate her guts. And so it was like going from that to like wow, like one of my residents has like a concussion now because he like just ran into the wall. Like that was a lot easier to deal with. So they placed me with men like the second year I was at the U too. So it was like very interesting, and a lot different of an experience than I had like my first year as an RA. Um, but it was that like building of community that I really loved as part of that position. Like that has really gone with me throughout like all of my positions, just like trying to figure out a way to build a community of people who may all be different in their own ways, but like finding those connections. Um and I think that's like just a little bit about like what I feel like my purpose is just like to find those connections between people and to foster that community in no matter where I am. So still trying to do that out here in New York. It's a little bit bigger of a of a circle of people, but
Right.
yeah,
A little more mobility.
a little bit.
So running through your LinkedIn profile, or running through just
Speaking of connections.
right of just you know I'm just struck by the immense amount of things that you have signed up to do and followed through with, because I think for most people they just I think it's really common for people to um, underestimate how much time they have, and to also underestimate how much time they waste and how much time they don't kind of spend working towards whatever their goals are, whether or not they actually have some like stated goals. And that makes me wonder, are you a very meticulous planner? Like, how do you find enough hours in your day to do all of these things?
And that's the age-old question. Um, so I'm definitely a meticulous planner. My GCal or my like Outlook calendars are pretty like set in stone. It's like, if somebody asks me like, hey, can you do this one thing? I'm like, hold on, let me check my GCal really quick. I also I love my to-do list, and actually as we're sitting here, I like have this to-do list like sitting in front of me, like staring at me just to like hold me accountable to be like, all right, like there are plenty of things I could do tonight, but these are the things that I have to get done before anything else. And that definitely keeps me productive and like aligning um, what I want to do with what I'm actually going to get done. When it comes to even like as long as you've known me, like up until today, I've always been that same, like having 5 jobs while going to school, full
Mm.
time. So, um, right now I find myself having 3 jobs and going to school for my master's full time. But, and so it's like most of the things on my plate at this point are midterms, and projects at work. Um, I guess I didn't really say yet, but I'm the Students and Temporary Housing Coordinator for the Department of Education in New York City. So I find ways to make the application and admissions process for New York City public school students more equitable to students in temporary housing or like students in shelter. So even though it's supposed to be like a 9 to 5, then you leave, it's not always that way. If you really like your job, or if you have a job that's really demanding, it like kind of never ends. So mostly my to-do list is like half finals and like half, actually like a fourth like my full-time job, and like a fourth my research assistant position. So it's just, yeah, it's a lot. And of course, I'm a barista on the weekends because, you gotta have your coffee, Phil. So,
Of course, of course.
but I find time, and I think really like the advice that I have is that um, you can say yes to a lot of things, but really following through with that is something that's a little bit more difficult that I found, because I'm definitely that like yes woman that's just like, oh, that sounds like amazing. For sure, I'm in, but then like finding the actual time to do it. So, just kind of like looking at your to-do list, or looking at like what goals that you have set for yourself for the week, and then figuring out like, all right, um, how many more things can I add to this before I'm gonna have to like drop something, or before I won't be able to follow through with things. So
Hmm.
you can be as productive as possible, but being that like trustworthy, like, you know, accountable person, that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And I mean, the question of whether or not you can, I think what's been really helpful for me is trying to narrow my focus, because I know that's one of the biggest problems that I've had, is that I can become so interested in things so easily for a couple of weeks at a time, where it can be completely all consuming, and then I realize I'm not doing my homework, or I'm not I'm not doing any of the countless number of things that I could be doing that would benefit me. So do you find that there's a certain point where you think that, okay, if I'm working and I am studying, and if I'm thinking about those two things, and my research assistant job, um, is that is do you just try to narrow your focus to those 3 or 4 things and have those take precedence over everything else, or do you find yourself easily distracted from like the tasks at hand that you've created for yourself?
Well, I think being up at Moorhead, it was probably the easiest time in my life to not be distracted. Because no offense, Moorhead, but like if you don't have a car, you can't leave campus. And so like I just never left campus. And so it was really easy for me to be like, all right, well, while I'm at my desk job, or like while I'm in my room for like office hours for my residents, like I can be working at homework, or I can be, doing this research, and then and then moving to the Twin Cities, I definitely, it was more of a struggle because there are so many things to do. There are like so many other distractions. And then coming to New York City, it's like, wow, it's like that times, 1,000. And I live in Bushwick, Brooklyn, and I go to school on the Upper West Side. And so my commute is about an hour and a half each way. So I'm on the train for 3 hours a day, um, which is broken up a little bit by like I work at City Hall. And so like it's like halfway to school. But either way, I'm spending 3 hours on the train. And so that's 3 hours I could be listening to music or, doing anything else. But instead, that's when I read for school. Or I like check my emails or I do, things that I could easily not be doing on the train, but I'm finding like ways to fit that in. So easily those could be distractions, but finding ways to turn those moments into opportunities to fit a little bit more in the day, that's really where you find like the normally like quote unquote like wasted hours of the day. Um, it can be that turnaround, that breaking point, or that like expanding of the carrying capacity of what you can truly do is just finding those little tiny ways. And I mean, I remember like, I think it was, I don't know, our sophomore year when you would carrying around a notebook and you'd be, I was like, okay, from 6:23 to 6:26, I talked to Jordan and things like that. And you like held yourself accountable, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I received a little bit of flack for that notebook, but it was such an important turning point in my life because I was a I was a very mediocre student the semester before, and I don't think that I necessarily really ever thought about kind of like wasted opportunities to use my time productively, and it made me think just what am I doing with my time? If I if I come home from my classes and I realize that I have, less than an hour to study, like there's something that is happening with my time, and I realized it wasn't just a black hole. There were, so many things that I was doing throughout my day that I didn't really realize that really did just create hours and hours of time where I wasn't necessarily working productively, and I wasn't even necessarily enjoying my time. Especially they're just kind of hours that um, kind of slunk away from me. And yeah, that is when I began writing down my day as exactly as I could because I realized that I just needed to monitor that behavior. It wasn't even about changing what I was doing for the first few weeks. Um, because yeah, as you said, I would just write down, when I visited you at the Rock, or how long it would take me to eat lunch, or how many people I would say hi to along the way. Well, actually, no, not that extreme, but whenever I stopped to talk to someone. And I mean, I saw immediate changes. I went from like a 2.3 or like a 2.4 GPA student to a 4.0 for the next 3 semesters, and it really changed the way I looked at my day because I instead of looking at my day as I wake up, I'll go to class, I'll probably do some homework, and I'll figure it out. I looked at the time from my alarm goes off to my head hits my pillow as time which I can potentially spend well. And you kind of touched on this too. As you start to do more things, as you start to plan more, as you start to kind of be a little more conscientious about how you spend your time, you realize that your capacity to spend your time well and to plan grows. Like I realized that what I thought was a hard ceiling was not a hard ceiling. And um, yeah, as you said, sophomore year we were both RAs, and I was also a research assistant, and I was also trying to get into the honors program somehow. And I was also really, really heavily involved with athletics that year, and it just um, I still look at that semester specifically, the second semester of my freshman year, as kind of a transformative moment in my life. I kind of saw that as the moment where I kind of took the reins on how I spend my time. and that slips in and out of being true. And there's still several days and several hours that I waste, but that little notebook that semester helped me quite a bit.
And that's still true for me today. I mean, not to like the extreme of like writing down everything that I do, but it's going home at the end of the day and saying how many boxes could I check off my to-do list. Why were the reasons like, or what were the reasons that I couldn't check off some of those things? And are there excuses like, oh, I had this big, huge project, or is it like there was a train delay, or like, I listened to this music or this other thing, and I began realizing like, all right, there are more days or more hours in the day than, I thought, because there are all these other factors that are getting in the way that really don't need to. I mean, I don't want to say I like went to the extreme or like this is why I did it, but like I even like cut off all my hair because like just the time that I like wasted just like, you know, taking a long shower and like trying to fix my hair up and all that kind of stuff. Like honestly, I've saved so much time since I cut my hair short. And and like setting out like my clothes before like going to bed so that I can like wake up early, get ready right before I go, and then be able to head out early so I can get a bunch of things done in the morning. Like it's incredible, like how you can actually, you think that you've reached this like point of like, oh yeah, this is like as much as I can productively get done, but there are usually little tiny like leverage points of change where you can find, that extra few minutes or that extra task that you can get done, just by like, again, just like holding yourself accountable or like monitoring yourself and like what you actually do. It's not to say like, you know, you can't stop at the rock and like chat with your friend, or you can't like, have a good conversation with your roommate. But thinking about what you really want to get done for the day, and just saying like, hey, I'm sorry, I have to like go get this. Like I don't think anybody ever like feels too bad about that.
Yeah, I think that's true. And to your point about, using that time well and realizing that there are, moments in your day in which you could be doing something, I really like the point that you made about your task list being laid out in front of you right now, because I think that's such good priming. It's so nice to have either your calendar open or your task list open, because I think that it primes you in those moments that you would otherwise be using to look at cat videos on YouTube or get sucked into Facebook. All those little moments where I feel like I have a moment to relax, I can breathe, are those moments where I tend to get sucked into things. Like I tend to get sucked into my YouTube vortex of my recommended channels and my subscribed channels. And I don't even think about the things that I had already set out to do. So the idea that you can also, like, and I think that this is something that I really realized freshman year, and that the people who can maybe work the most effectively, I think it's probably that they have some sort of, worldview, or they have some sort of outlook on life that kind of helps drive them to do that, or some, external pressure, and we can get to that later. But I think it's also the systems that you set up for yourself. As you said, you lay out your clothes the day before. You probably have at least part of your to-do list for the next day already completed before bed, right?
I try.
Yeah. And it seems like one of the most important things is just having a system, maybe in your room or just in your life, whether it's on your computer or somewhere in your house, to remind yourself, to prime yourself in some way and think, okay, today is a day where I can get my things done. I can actually do it. I think it's kind of overlooked, the ways that you can create an environment that you
Oh,
can become productive in.
exactly. And I think that being being a CA, I picked up a few things that are a little corny, but the idea of positive defaults was something that we always talk to our residents about, was setting up things that just become a habit to you that would be beneficial. So a positive default could be automatic, withdrawals from your checking into your savings account every month, or like like automatically pulling a certain amount, a certain percentage of your paycheck and putting it straight in your savings because that's money that you don't ever like even have the thought to touch. And that would be a positive default. And for me, especially my junior year, I also joined the honors program at that time at the U, and I was already having to start on my honors thesis, and so every week I would put into my calendar like spend 3 hours on honors thesis, and so like that just became part of my calendar. I block off part of my Friday to like work on that or work on another project. And so like even if it's something as simple as, um studying or eating dinner, like when you put that into your calendar, you really hold yourself accountable for doing that at that time for that amount of time so
Mm.
that you like get distracted or let your time boundaries go over. And so it's little things like that. And honestly, I could even be better at it. Like there are things that I think about. I'm like, oh, I could definitely make that a part of my routine or use that as a positive default. So I'm like constantly changing my practices. And so it's like I'm definitely not nowhere near perfect, but I definitely think that everybody has different positive defaults that they could use in their own life.
That was actually one of my questions for you, whether or not you find yourself kind of picking up and adopting new ways of tracking your behavior, or new ways of um, maybe even new paradigms or new kind of outlooks on why you should be spending your time a certain way, and what effect it can have on your life. Yeah, you said that you are kind of constantly tweaking it, getting new things, kind of assimilating new knowledge, and finding ways that it can benefit you.
Oh yeah, and I think just like just because of my master's, like I'm constantly like overthinking a lot of things that I do. So my master's is in sociology of education, and so like being that sociologist, I'm constantly like, oh, do I do this because like the dominant ideology makes me think a certain way? It's like ridiculous like thoughts, but sometimes I'll be like, all right, am I doing this because it's really beneficial to me, or am I doing this because all the people around me are doing it? Um, Especially once I started working for the Department of Ed, I had to kind of conform to that style of working, which was like working in a very like, bureaucratic kind of cubicle like office, which before I'd never really done previous. And so it was like finding a way to mold my personality and my like crazy like I'm a pretty positive person, but like being very talkative to like having to sit behind a desk and type out a lot and things like that. I'm constantly like having to change my own ways to fit the organizations that I now belong to. um but I also, you know I take my habits that I thought were great from all the other experiences that I've had and have blended them in with these new habits that I've learned at my jobs. And so I think I'm like changing every day um, in what I think is a like in a beneficial way.
Hopefully,
But
right.
hopefully, yeah, exactly. We all like to think that, but um, and especially like being a first generation college student. I never really thought I'd be where I am right now. And so constantly I'm thinking about, all right, what did I do to get here? And you know, what other things could I do to excel myself even further? Because now I know that it's like possible to be where I am. And so I don't find it impossible to be even further than where I am right now. Um, so I think that there's still much more to learn. And I am definitely that lifelong learner. so,
Yeah,
so
good.
I'm excited. I'm excited to see where life takes me. I'm like a fresh-faced 23-year-old, and I've already, I have the resume of like a 50-year-old. So,
Right.
so we'll see. I don't know.
Do you find yourself trying to like chart your habits? Like if you have a habit, say of like drinking coffee and you want to cut down on it, do you find yourself trying to chart that and make sure you don't drink too much? Or do you do the same for positive habits, things like meditation or exercise or sleep? Do you say like, okay, it's important for me to not drink more than 200 milligrams of caffeine a day. And then do you kind of like write down whenever you have coffee or anything like that?
So I it's funny you use that example because being a barista, I definitely like don't check my coffee habits. I just by habit um of my schedule, like I'll grab a coffee in the morning and go to work and probably like grab a green tea or something when I'm going off to class at night. So like it's working those kinds of like habits into your schedule. So it's like you're not going to have too much coffee because you only have one coffee in the morning, and a green tea at night, something like that. Um, but for the most part, I I did join a gym here called Blink, which it's like very cheap. But it's a very positive, happy environment. You go in, it's bright colors, everybody's always so nice to you. And so it makes it really easy to like want to go work out, because you're like surrounded by like really happy, positive people. And even if I'm having like a super terrible day, I'm like, well, at least I've got the gym. So I was like, I did figure out a way to work that into my schedule, like every other day, after class, going to the gym before I go home. And so like making sure that before I leave the house for the day, I pack up my gym things. I pack a packet of tea. So it's like those ways to kind of like monitor my good behavior and monitor like my bad behavior, or like parts of my life that it could be bad. It's kind of just like worked its way into my schedule. And when I do find that like I'm drinking too much coffee or I'm not sleeping enough or I haven't worked out for like a week and a half, um that's when I like you can kind of feel it because after you've done so many good things or like have worked out a schedule that works really well for your mind and your body, you can start to tell when things are amiss. And especially because I do yoga and I meditate, it's really easy because you actually have time to spend analyzing your body and like every part of your body. And like the great thing about yoga is when a part of your body's off or a part of your body's sore because that's just part of the practice is like really analyzing what doesn't feel good. And so I think that really helped me craft this routine that's like, well, I can feel myself being tired, so I'm going to go to bed. I know that there are some things on my to-do list that I haven't checked off, but I can tell that my body doesn't want to stay up any longer. So I'm going to go to bed. And it's been hard because, you have to kind of adjust your schedule and adjust what you're capable of because of that. But there are limitations to what your mind and what your body and what your spirit can handle sometimes. Um, and so that was a long-winded answer to that. But in general, like I really do find myself monitoring that. But at the same time, you know, it's midterms. So so right now it's easy to say, but some things took priority over those better habits that I have. So
Yeah, and that makes. I mean, yeah, of course that makes sense. I've had similar things happen. I remember senior year, I was living with my good friend Tom, and I would create based off of a psychology course I took called behavioral modification. I would begin like creating these behavioral contracts that I would write out and then sign and then give to Tom, and they would be things like, you know, on any given day, Ryan is not allowed to consume more than 300 milligrams of caffeine in 10 beers. Um, and I would like give myself like a strike system where if I wasn't able to do that, and if I wasn't able to meet the contract that I had, I would actually pay Tom something. I would write it out in advance what what his reward would be for me failing, and it would have to be something that mattered enough where it would be impactful. But I guess I'm not sure how I feel about that when I reflect upon it, because I don't really know that it actually helped change that behavior. I would just kind of cheat, which I think a lot of us do, and that's one of the most frustrating things I think I found about trying to chart my behavior and like chart the things I put into my body is that I've um, very clearly seen myself relapse on some of the things which I tried to make a concerted effort to stop. For example, caffeine. I've just now, after settling into life in Washington, begun charting kind of some of my macro behavior every day, just things like exercise and movement and caffeine and that's a completely different thing from just my task lists and all of those things. But I, I'm getting to the point now where I see how much coffee I'm drinking every day, and instead of doing anything about it, I just look at it and kind of try to treat it with the cold indifference that like a behavioral researcher would, and they're just looking at data. Like I see that this is a data point, and I'll administer therapy later.
I think that yeah, exactly. There are times in your life where you just kind of have to be an observer of yourself,
Mm,
um, not necessarily your own psychologist, and that's not terrible, unless it's obviously a very, very terrible thing that you're doing, oh man, I'm doing drugs every day. Like, oh, that's kind of crazy. That's another data point. Like,
yeah.
but
Wow.
but but there are some things that you have this ideal of who you want to be and what you want to be, and one day maybe you'll reach that. But it's little tiny steps along the way that it's just like you're like, all right, this is where I am right now. Maybe this is not where I want to be, but for right now, it's not hurting me too much. I'll be okay. And you've got to like kind of treat yourself treat yourself a little bit better, because it's when you really have those external pressures that you were talking about, it makes you lose all that internal um, incentive to really do much. Why am I really doing this? Why am I really cutting down on my caffeine? Why am I going to the gym, or why am I not going to the gym? And why should I go to the gym, right? Oh,
Yeah.
goodness, it makes me feel good, and everybody there is really happy, rather than like, oh man, I didn't go to the gym today, so I have to pay Tom, $5. That kind of like that's when you really start disconnecting from why you're making those changes in your life, I think.
Right, yeah, because if you kind of lose the end goal or you lose the reason for doing it, it just kind of becomes rote. It becomes a chore. And actually, that is exactly a point that I wanted to touch upon. I found that I am a phenomenal tracker of my behavior. Like I love it. I've actually found that I get so much satisfaction from like creating Excel charts based on the behavior I'm doing and things I want to promote and things that I want to do less of and like skills that I want to learn, and I found that I kind of there's a couple of steps to my, I guess, self-help or my proactivity charting, and I find that step one is making the chart, getting super excited and getting really motivated about all these changes and how it's gonna just completely change my life. And then after a couple of weeks, I find that I've kind of lost my passion for it. I've lost much of the outlook and much of the kind of mindset I was in, and so I kind of forget why I was doing it, and then I just stop and kind of repeat that process over and over. So I've got like so many different charts for example, exercise. Like I have like different workouts I'm going to do, and like I've I see where I've charted it for, several weeks or months at a time, but I never look back on it. And so I never really get much of I guess, a sense of satisfaction because I don't really sit down and reflect upon kind of what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And so my question to you is that something that has been really important to you to kind of make time to sit down and think like, what have I been doing lately? You know, how does this help me become the woman I want to be? Um, does it? Do I need to reevaluate that goal? Are these goals even helpful at all? Do you sit down and reflect upon your life often?
I I do, and but I think it's a lot more like a meta like analysis of my life rather than like a micro like, am I eating the things I want to for the week or am I doing this? But it's like the reflections that I have of my life are more like, is this the path that I want to go down? Is education, is working in the public sector something that I think I can make the most change in? Or, should I go back to nonprofits? Or, um, things like that are like very much a part of my like weekly reflection because I was placed out here in New York, like I never expected to be out here. And so it's reflecting on like, how did my life turn out the way it is? And, how do I want it to go? And I'm appreciative of every, opportunity that I've had. And so it's reflecting on that and thinking like, being thankful as well as like something that I really try to incorporate into my reflections is being like, all right, these are the things that, went well, some things went bad, but what am I thankful for this week, or who am I thankful for this week? As far as especially my habits last year, I mean, being in a city or core member, I was working like 12-hour days and my commute it was 3 hours. And so for 15 hours a day, I'm dedicated and devoted to this work. And so, and being a lactose intolerant vegetarian, in teaching in the South Bronx, like I pretty much all there was to eat for me was like rice and beans. So I had like rice and beans and sweet plantains like every day. And so I got to the end of the school year, and I was just like, wow, I definitely don't feel great. It's like maybe I should cut down. And so like definitely like in the moment I wasn't able to make those adjustments, but then, looking back I was like, okay, this is how my year went. This is how I want my year to go this year. It's not going to be rice and beans and plantains for every meal, although, there was nothing wrong with that either. But thinking about like, I never had time to exercise, and that's something important to me because it helps create clarity, I think in my mind. And so finding, even in my busy schedule this year, time to sit down and have an actually good meal rather than like rushing to the nearest bodega to grab some food. Or, you know after class, sure, class gets out at 9 o'clock, but the gym's open till 11. I've got a little bit of time before I have to hop on the train anyways. And so I do those reflections, but those micro reflections are a lot more infrequent than my like weekly like quarter life crises. Like, oh, this is what I'm doing. This is what I want to do with my life. But I, I'm really happy with where I'm at, and so if I have to like change certain habits, those that usually takes a little bit more time.
Yeah, and then sometimes a little bit trickier to find the triggers for them. And
Mm.
like especially if you're, craving like a sugary drink or coffee or whatever it is. Um, can you tell me a little bit about these weekly reflections? What does that look like for you? What do you do?
Um, so I work 7 days a week, and so it's not like I'm like, yeah, it's the weekend. I'm like relaxed, and it's mostly like, what day is it right now? Like, because you're working every day, it's like ah, but um, I've kind of fit into my schedule like every Sunday night, when I'm done closing at the coffee shop, I'll come back home. I'll like light some incense and I'll sit in my room, and right before I study or right before, I check off a bunch of things from my to-do list, I kind of just like I sit and I meditate, and then afterwards, after my mind's a little bit more clear, I think, all right, so it's been 7 days since I did this last. What has my 7 days looked like? Um, di am I working towards those overarching goals that I have set for myself? And for the most part, it's thinking about, what things did I learn this week, especially being a student. Even when I wasn't like an official like college student, I um still learned things every week. Like I think you're constantly learning, especially if you have a job, when you're with kids, because I honestly learned more from my kids than I feel like I even taught them, which is I think a cheating cheating a little bit. But it's thinking like, okay, what things did I learn this week, and how am I going to utilize this knowledge? Um, and it's the classes I'm taking right now, they really make you think. And so I feel like every week I'm like learning something new, that like when I have this reflection session, I'm like, whoa, like, I really realized that the dominant ideology of the education system like really is, particular to one type of group of people. And, how do I want to change that? How do I want to utilize that knowledge and think about how I can make that change? And so based on that, like that being an example, I've been like researching more into culturally relevant pedagogy, which is a style of teaching where you teach a student based on the culture that they're coming into class with, and utilizing their culture as an asset rather than deficit. And so because of these things I've learned and these reflections that I've had, I've really been able to focus what I'm interested in it. And even if I go on these like, Google search tangents, at least it's focused on what I'm actually aspiring to do. And so yeah, I think everybody should at one point during their week kind of just really reflect on, you know, what they're doing and why they're doing it, and what changes they could make to kind of adapt to who they want to be or what they want to do.
Yeah, and on the topic of weekly reflections, your task list, if you carry a notebook with you, is it every day of the week you have kind of a to-do list?
It depends. I have like, I swear, like 6 calendars because they all represent something else. And so like I've got this giant like desk, I don't know what you would call it, like a desk or like a wall calendar, that you can fill in every day, like tasks. And so I use that for my schoolwork, and like what readings are due when, and what when papers are due when. And I have a calendar for work, and when I have meetings, and when I should complete certain tasks by. And I do a lot of event planning, so it's like thinking about the things along the way. And then I have a calendar for my like research position, and like thinking about like who I need to reach out to when. But right now, like right in front of me, I have just like a list, and it's just like a to-do list with a bunch of like check boxes. And so like an example of like, some of the little tasks is like, I emailed my old residents from like 2, 3 years ago, um, last week, and just said, hey, like thinking of you always, like tell me some updates in your life. And so they email me back. And so I have a bunch of check boxes of like, email this person, like in quotes, or like in parentheses, like don't forget to mention like blank, and just like, because I'll read their messages and like, oh, I've got to email them, but I don't have time right now, but I want to make sure I want to do it later. And um like email professor asking this question, or um begin drafting this midterm, or respond to somebody on LinkedIn because like somebody sent me a message and I didn't have time. So it's little tiny tasks, but things that if I want to um, constantly be uh, as busy as I am, just like little things that could easily just fall out of my mind. So it's like I do have like multiple calendars, but they all serve different purposes. But just having this like right in front of me at all times, I'm like, okay, I could look, at cat videos on YouTube, or I could respond back to this resident who sent me like a really heartfelt email and I should really respond to him. So it's things like that. It's just thinking about, you could slack off for a second, but what is that second going to be like replacing? Like that second of cat video is going to be replacing.
Couple of letters in an email.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I think that's a really good point to touch on because um, I do something similar. I have a task list or to-do list, which is kind of this little black notebook that I bring with me all the time. And if I'm doing well, it's always in my pocket. It's always around. But I find that if I just wrote down what I needed to do every day, it would be pretty much an inexhaustive list. Like it would be, or rather, it would be an exhaustive list of just every little thing that I should be doing and could be doing. But I also think that it would really make me lose perspective on the reason why I'm doing them. And to that point, I think it's really important to have something like a calendar or like a project list where you decide like, you know, what is it that I want to work on? What are some of the important things in my life, and how do I get there? And like, so what if I'm, for example, looking into, um, I don't know, becoming a deadlifting champion in Washington or the greater Pacific Northwest. I would think like, okay, not only do I need to lift weights, which is in my task list, but then I also should have like a monthly plan for what kind of goals I'd have 1 month out, but also 3 months out, and also a year out, and maybe even 3 years out, because it could be a while. And I think that it's so important not only to chart what those very specific things are, which you kind of just need to do. And as you said, I mean, they could be things like even emailing people and like networking with people and just like little tasks, which will definitely eat up your day. But without that larger perspective on like the project at hand, I think it would be so easy to just feel a little bit unmoored, like a little bit just like you're this tiny boat floating in the ocean and you don't really have any real clear direction. Um, and so I think future goals and long-term goals are like as important as the little task lists, which will, hopefully over time move you towards that goal.
Exactly, and that's why like my reflections tend to be more of that long-term goal-oriented reflection is like, all right, like what do I truly want to do? What are my goals? Um, did this week help me accomplish that? And that's the way that I look at it is like, sure, these little tiny tasks, they're not going to be like super grand or it's super big in the grand scheme of things, but this one check on this box could mean something to that person that I'm responding to, or it could mean a new connection, which could mean, a network, in a certain organization that I'm looking at applying to. Like little boxes that you can check off, can really become bigger parts of your life plan.
Yeah.
To be honest, yeah.
Well, I mean, it absolutely like just builds the foundation and it colors your day. If you know that you need to spend a couple hours doing a homework assignment, maybe that homework assignment won't, define your career for the rest of your life, but it's like you never know when one of those bricks that you're laying for the foundation will really be noticed if it's missing.
Oh, exactly. And um, I think that's the thing that I've really learned about myself is that there's no task too small to not complete. Um, and some of the littlest things or the easiest things that I've done that it could have easily not done, um, have turned into like some really great, uh, accomplishments in my life or really great friends that I wouldn't have been connected with if I didn't, follow through with this one little thing. Um, and so just kind of like very like broad, but being productive, it's not only just, to accomplish A, B, and C, but it's to become a more well-rounded person, and be able to dedicate yourself and your emotional energy to the people and things that you care about the most. And I really think that when it comes down to it, um, you can do a million things, but are those million things going to make you and the people around you happy? That's really what I like to think about.
And that's one of the most challenging things to kind of, I don't know, to find a good answer for, because that's one of humanity's oldest questions, right? Like, what is a good use of time? Or, to put in other words, like, what should I be doing with my time? And I think really at its core, you have to start with the end in mind, and you have to say, like, what do I want with my life? What kind of a life do I want to live, and how can I get from where I am now to that point? And I think that's so tricky. And I think it has to just take, you know, so many different weekly reflections and so many different like yearly goals. Um, and I'm sure it changes as you age. But what do you think you should be doing with your time, Jordan? What's a good use of your time? You
Like,
specifically.
not me specifically. Um, well, I really love, honestly, and this is like a cop out, but I really just love volunteering. And I was about to say I'd spend the rest of my life volunteering if I could, but I could really continue down the path of nonprofit management and really spend my time in the service of others. And that has always been my biggest motivator for a lot of the things I do. So that's honestly the biggest well spent amount of time for me has just been serving others. And I think that will be my continuous theme throughout my life.
Yeah, and um, I suspected that actually, because it one thing I was really struck by is how driven you have always seemed to be. Like I never, I guess, truly knew what your goals were, but it always kind of seemed to me that it was, it's kind of uncommon for someone to be so driven without an external factor kind of pushing down on them. And sometimes that factor is like a religious organization or a volunteering organization or even kind of like a societal outlook on life. But um, so your guiding philosophy is volunteerism.
I think so. And like I could go on to this forever, but that's also why I did the year of public service is because I was like, you know what? I'm a fresh-faced graduate, or like undergraduate holder. You know, I'm a first generation college student. I should like use the opportunities that I've had to give back to others. And my father's always been like a person that's always been like, no matter how little we have, there are people that have less. So constantly be thinking about those people and what you can do to support those people. And that's how I ended up, in New York City. And that's how I ended up going into what I'm doing is just that's my biggest internal pressure. And that's I think that really honestly is what makes me so productive is because I'm like, if I'm losing out on time, you know, doing X, then that means that I can't spend this time volunteering or I can't spend this time teaching or um, I can't spend this time even just being a barista, serving a great cup of coffee to somebody with a smile. Like serving others comes in many forms. And so I think that's my biggest motivator, honestly.
Hmm. Um, and just out of curiosity, how big of a role do you think meditation plays in your life? Like, how big of a role does meditation have in your day-to-day behavior, do you think?
Well, I think with all of the things that I do, um, just and constantly going from place to place, if I didn't have meditation, I probably would have been like gone like crazy out of my mind by now. Um, because it's really that way that I calm myself down and like I'm able to come back home and like center myself and be like, all right, this day was for something, this day might have been crazy, but it wasn't for nothing, and first, kind of clearing my mind and then filling it with good thoughts. That really is the way that I utilize my meditation to kind of be able to do all the things that I do.
Do you meditate most days?
Um, I would say, I mean, I would say maybe like three-fourths of the week. Um, as much as I try to, it'll be like, I've got this assignment due at midnight. And so like, that's my number one focus. Um, but actually the summer after, the summer that I had seen you in Oslo, I spent a week with a bunch of Buddhist monks in Denmark at the end of summer, and they taught me how to truly meditate. And before it was like just easy to be like, I'm sitting still for like 5 minutes, I'm meditating, but like really have a mantra that you say to yourself and you really like find yourself like deep within your own, center, and um that really completely changed the way that I utilized my meditation and utilize that time. Um and so now it's just a part of like my daily practice, and I I mean, like, I would say, like, everybody should try it. And some people are just like, that's not for me. But at least trying it once, or, finding a way to reflect or a way to calm yourself, um, in whatever form, I think is important for you to be continuously productive, because you couldn't do this forever if you didn't have that moment of calm.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. You're not just running around with a chicken with its head cut off, right? You have that grounding. I remember how you described your meditation method to me. I think when we were sophomores, you said that you like to think that your mind is like the peak of a mountain,
I
and
guess I still remember
yeah,
it.
yeah, and all your thoughts are clouds, which just kind of come into contact with this peak and then just keep drifting off into nowhere. And so just to think of the the watcher, as this mountain peak, and having your thoughts just as these ephemeral clouds, which just kind of come and go. It it's helped me a lot. I'm not sure if that's still something that you do in your practice, but whenever I find myself getting pulled away by a thought and really kind of chasing it down a rabbit hole, that's one of the most effective ways I've found to kind of bring myself back to that center. So thank you for that.
That makes me so happy that you still remember that.
Yeah.
Like a good like 4 years. But
Yeah.
it's honestly it's such a great metaphor, because you can observe your thoughts. You can understand that you're having these thoughts, but then just like letting them pass and letting them go. That's people's biggest struggle. But when you kind of imagine yourself in that analogy, just being like, yes, I am the peak. I'm just observing these clouds, these thoughts. Yeah, and I definitely still use that. I was given a mantra and like a way to kind of go into meditation that's a little bit more like even like deeper, and thinking of yourself as like this like floating orb and things like that, just like other analogies. But again, an analogy. And like you kind of have to forget that you're a human being for a few seconds. It's kind of like how I think about meditation.
Yeah, like modulate what that means to you at least.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But I'm still indeed that peak.
Well, Jordan, people can find you at LinkedIn, right? And I can include that in the comments section. So for anybody looking to get into contact with Jordan Pinneke, just check out the comments section below. And Jordan, truly, I think that you are just a great role model for what it can look like to kind of try to live an effective life. And so thank you for the model that you have set for me, because although I haven't seen you in quite a while, and although we didn't even spend that much time together at MSUM, you did leave a lasting impact on me. And I'm sure you're doing that to people wherever you are. So whether or not we see each other again in New York or Washington or in Oslo, Norway, I'm sure I'll see you again sometime, and I'm looking forward to it.
That means so much to me. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for checking out today's episode of Learner's Permit. If you'd like to see more Curious Magnet, just go to curiousmagnet.com, and you can also find us on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Curious Magnet for all of them. Thank you. Stay curious.